head of a local rap label, and several others have been arrested as part of a drug bust in East Baton Rouge Parish.
7 people arrested during a drug bust in our area, and 2 others are still wanted. Deputies had search warrants at different locations across East Baton Rouge and Livingston.
New tonight, a North Carolina man is behind bars after Louisiana State Police say he was caught with more than $1 million and several types of drugs in his semi-truck during a traffic stop in Port Allen.
People in custody after a ring is busted in Slidell, Louisiana. Now investigators are looking for 16 more suspects. They say that ring was based out of Louisiana at a tow truck company.
Investigators say that Raymond Allen Jr., also known as Slim, was the ringleader behind this. Officers from Slidell, the DEA, and the NOPD developed intelligence tracking Allen, who's on your far left, to a New Orleans East apartment.
That's right, Christine. In recent weeks, the Lafayette Police Department seized nearly $1 million worth of fentanyl in one day.
Louisiana's drug bust headlines aren't just random traffic stops, they're snapshots of a larger ecosystem. Major interstates and port corridors, neighborhood distribution zones, and task forces that build cases through surveillance, controlled buys, wiretaps, and coordinated warrant sweeps. From Baton Rouge and Slidell to Concordia Parish and LaPlace, these investigations show how Fentanyl and Meth have reshaped enforcement priorities, how firearms often travel alongside narcotics, and how cases can range from quick-hit stops that turn up cash and drugs to months-long operations that end in dozens of arrests and federal indictments.
In Baton Rouge, 9 arrests were made in a drug trafficking operation linked to the Spider Nation rap label. East Baton Rouge deputies say search warrants were served at several locations across Baton Rouge and Livingston Parish.
On October 7, 2025, the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office said a multi-agency investigation led to 7 arrests and 2 suspects still at large in a drug and guns case tied to members of the Spider Nation rap label centered in Baton Rouge's Bel Air neighborhood. Deputies said investigators used controlled purchases of Fentanyl and Meth, plus surveillance, to identify multiple locations in Baton Rouge and one in Livingston Parish allegedly used in the operation. Investigators seized a wide 1,009 of alleged contraband, along with digital scales, thousands of dollars, and several firearms.
New tonight, a North Carolina man is behind bars after Louisiana State Police say he was caught with more than $1 million and several types of drugs in his semi-truck during a traffic stop in Port Allen. State Police telling us 29-year-old Lenny Collado was stopped by troopers around 9:30 this morning. That's when they say troopers spotted a white plastic bag on the floorboard that appeared to be holding a large sum of cash. After further inspection, authorities seized more than $1 million.
February 14, 2025, Louisiana State Police said a trooper working commercial motor vehicle enforcement stopped a tractor-trailer on LA 415 north of I-10 in Port Allen for a Level 2 inspection. During the inspection, the trooper reported seeing a white plastic bag on the floorboard that appeared to contain a large amount of cash. With assistance from the West Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office, investigators searched the vehicle and reported seizing about $1.1 million in U.S. currency, about 183 pounds of suspected Mary, and about 7 grams of suspected Coca-Cola. Police identified the driver as Lenny Collado of Charlotte, North Carolina, and said he was arrested and booked on charges including possession with intent to distribute Mary and transactions involving proceeds from drug offenses.
Mark Keelan is the head of Major League Entertainment. Investigators say a drug bust led to his arrest, and many others are now accused of being part of the group. The sheriff says more than 2,200 lethal doses of fentanyl, along with other drugs and weapons, were taken at 12 different locations.
On July 15, 2025, the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office announced a major takedown they said was tied to a Baton Rouge-based polydrug trafficking group with connections to people affiliated with the local rap label Major League Entertainment. Deputies said the investigation began in early July, then expanded through surveillance and a controlled purchase of drugs, which they said helped them identify 12 locations being used to store and distribute drugs. EBRSO said agents executed search warrants at those locations and arrested multiple suspects, including Jorno Keelan, identified in reporting as the label leader who deputies said was booked on conspiracy to distribute. Authorities emphasized the scale of what they said was seized. EBRSO said the warrants produced roughly 242 to 245 pounds of Mary, about 2,240 lethal doses of Fentanyl, about 2.6 pounds of synthetic Mary, and various prescription-type units. Digital scales.
Office arrested 6 people, with 3 still at large after a drug bust yesterday. Officials say narcotic agents did a multi-week investigation, getting warrants for 14 locations across East Baton Rouge, Livingston, and Ascension Parish.
On Friday, December 5, 2025, the East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office announced the results of a multi-parish narcotics investigation that ended with 6 arrests and 3 suspects still at large, after investigators said they conducted controlled purchases of Fentanyl and ran extended surveillance before moving in with warrants. Officials said the investigation ran about 3 weeks and culminated on December 4th, when multiple divisions executed 14 search warrants across East Baton Rouge, Ascension, and Livingston parishes, including locations along major corridors like Florida Boulevard, Airline Highway, and Greenwell Street. Authorities reported seizing a mix of narcotics and cash. EBRSO also reported recovering 8 firearms, including multiple handguns, 2 shotguns, a blackout rifle, and a micro Draco-style pistol, plus $3,841 in cash.
Investigators say that Raymond Allen Jr., also known as Slim, was the ringleader behind this. Officers from Slidell, the DEA, and the NOPD developed intelligence tracking Allen, who's on your far left, to a New Orleans East apartment, which they say was the hub for this operation. They say that he was distributing these drugs across the North Shore.
On December 2, 2025, Slidell Police and partner agencies said a multi-agency drug and weapons investigation led to 3 arrests connected to what they described as a retail-level H and Fentanyl distribution network operating on Louisiana's North Shore. Investigators said the alleged ringleader was Raymond Allen Jr., and that intelligence work linked him to an operation based out of an apartment in New Orleans East, which they described as the hub. After securing a search warrant and executing it at that location, investigators reported seizing about 153 grams of Fentanyl, several firearms, and drug paraphernalia.
That was Maddie Kirk reporting. Tonight, 3 men are locked up on several charges after a traffic stop led to a drug bust. Baton Rouge police say they tried to stop a car along Shea Avenue and Mark Ann Drive. We're told the driver refused to stop, leading to a short chase.
On October 28, 2025, Baton Rouge police said what started as a traffic stop attempt near Shea Avenue and Mark Ann Drive turned into a short vehicle chase and foot pursuit after the driver allegedly refused to stop. Officers detained the driver and 2 passengers, and investigators said the arrests led to the seizure of several pounds of Mary, a firearm, and video equipment. BRPD's follow-up, as reported locally, said the evidence from the stop also pointed investigators to a vacant house that was allegedly being used to sell and stash Mary, which was then searched by BRPD's Special Response Team with a K-9 unit.
The St. John Sheriff's Office and federal drug enforcement agents raided a home in LaPlace. They seized 95 kilos of coke with a street value of about $2.5 million. Authorities also discovered 8 firearms and 45 grams of suspected pills.
The weapons, the drugs, the way they operate, we've been watching them for a long time.
Authorities delayed announcing the March 19th drug bust because agents were investigating up the chain. In addition to drugs and guns, the suspects also had about 100 chickens in the backyard. The sheriff confirms a raid last September where his deputies seized another 77 kilos led to this latest drug bust.
March 19, 2024, deputies with the St. John the Baptist Parish Sheriff's Office Narcotics Division, working alongside federal agents, searched a home in LaPlace and announced a major seizure they valued at roughly $2.5 million in Coca-Cola. In the sheriff's public release, SJSO said they recovered about 95 kilos of Coca-Cola, about 45 grams of suspected pressed Fentanyl pills, and 8 firearms, and that 3 LaPlace men were arrested in connection with the case. The sheriff's office also said the investigation was ongoing and that more arrests were expected.
Facing charges today after authorities say they found fentanyl during a drug bust. On Tuesday, Drug Task Force investigators were conducting surveillance at a house on East Louisiana Street. They say D'Angela Bishop was pulled over shortly after pulling up to that house, and Demetris Gray were arrested after police found them inside the home with several guns, digital scales, and
authorities said one of the men had Fenty powder on his pants and shoes, and that a swab test showed a positive result for Fenty on both men's hands. On March 26, 2025, authorities in Evansville, Indiana announced a Fenty and guns case that started with surveillance on a home on East Louisiana Street. Investigators said they watched D'Angela Bishop enter the home with another person and leave a short time later in a vehicle. Deputies stopped the car for a traffic violation, searched it, and reported finding a purse on the floorboard near Bishop's seat that contained her ID and multiple baggies of fentanyl. They also said a pat-down turned up more Fenty. Officials said Bishop was being held without bond. After that traffic stop, SWAT and the Drug Task Force executed a warrant at the East Louisiana Street house. Inside, they said they found Dallin Rhodes and Demetris Gray. Investigators described a light-colored powder throughout the home and reported that testing showed it was Fenty, and they said they located multiple semi-automatic guns, ammunition, digital scales, and additional fentanyl powder. Authorities said Rhodes and Gray were charged with dealing Fenty along with other charges.
A years-long investigation into drug trafficking. Last week, U.S. Attorney Brandon Brown, the FBI, and Concordia Parish Sheriff's Office announced the federal indictments of 13 suspects. Well, today, 11 more were arrested on parish warrants.
And multiple firearms. In Concordia Parish, Louisiana, a 2-year investigation by the FBI and the Concordia Parish Sheriff's Office culminated in a federal crackdown when officials said 13 people were arrested charged in a meth trafficking conspiracy operating in the Concordia Rapids Parish area. Prosecutors framed it as a single connected drug network, alleging the defendants conspired to distribute and possess with intent to distribute methamphetamine. And local reporting said investigators used tools like phone taps to track the organization and its supply chain.
They call us the hub city for a reason. So Lafayette is in the middle, obviously, so I-10 meets up with I-49.
Lieutenant Quibido says he's seen an increase in seizures and arrests. For all of 2023, the department seized a total of 3.2 pounds. He says the cartels stamp symbols on the drug as a way to market their product.
The criminals are trying to get their product recognized and identified by their consumers because, like almost any other kind of product, consumers have a preferable brand that they like to go to.
The massive Fenty bust in Louisiana segment posted May 14 TG 2024 is referring to Slidell's Operation Heat Wave, a multi-agency crackdown led by the Slidell Police Department with federal partners that authorities said produced the largest Fenty seizure in St. Tammany Parish history. Investigators described it as a summer-long operation aimed at drug trafficking and violent crime, and officials said it resulted in 131 arrests and the seizure of nearly 12 kilos of Fenty valued around $300,000. Along with additional narcotics.
Tonight, a Louisiana man was arrested yesterday after Beaumont police found drugs and cash inside of his car. Narcotics officers pulled Leonard Howard over along I-10, about 10 miles west of Beaumont. Officials say that they found about 3 kilos and more than $5,000 in cash. Howard was taken to the Jefferson County Correctional Facility.
It started like a routine traffic stop on Interstate 10 in Beaumont, but it ended with a major seizure. According to a Beaumont Police Department release, narcotics officers stopped a vehicle near I-10 mile marker 835, and during the stop they reported finding 3 kilograms of Coca-Cola, an unlisted amount of marijuana, and about $5,500 in cash. Police identified the driver as Leonard Howard of Franklin, Louisiana, and said he was taken to the Jefferson County Jail and booked on a possession of a controlled substance charge.
Custody after a heroin ring is busted in Slidell, Louisiana. Now investigators are looking for 16 more suspects. They say that ring was based out of Louisiana at a tow truck company, but it was also operating in that state and here in Mississippi.
In late May 2019, authorities on Louisiana's Northshore announced a major Slidell area trafficking takedown that they said also reached into South Mississippi. St. Tammany Parish Sheriff Randy Smith and Louisiana State Police said detectives executed 11 search warrants after a long-running narcotics investigation. and they reported seizing about a half kilogram of H along with roughly 24 guns during the enforcement phase. Officials publicly identified the alleged leaders as Jason Hoddard and Casey Johnson, along with Don Herbert and Turquoise Gillum, and said the group used legitimate-looking fronts to support the operation, reporting specifically named Roussel Towing as a base where investigators said large quantities of H were stored packaged, and referenced aerial recovery as another business connected to the case narrative. Authorities said the organization was responsible for distributing H and other controlled substances across St. Tammany Parish, Orleans Parish, and South Mississippi. And reporting also noted investigators identified dozens of additional people they believed were part of the network.
They say that they, along with RPSO and the U.S. Marshals Violent Offender Task Force, making Saturday's bust on Highway 165 near Woodworth, arrested in the bust 37-year-old Archie Lewis Carter Jr. of Alexandria, who was the driver, police say, and two Houston men, 33-year-old Anthony Manuel and 31-year-old Isaiah Jones.
The traffic stop on Highway 165 near Woodworth, Rapids Parish, turned into a major drug seizure that state and local agencies valued at over $600,000. Louisiana State Police and the Rapids Parish Sheriff's Office said they searched the vehicle and found large quantities of narcotics. Initial local reports listed 3,000+ grams of H and Fendi, 200+ grams of Coca-Cola, 1,000+ grams of meth, and 12,000+ dosage units of X, and arrested the driver Archie Louis Carter Jr. along with passengers Isaiah Jones and Anthony Manuel. All three were booked on multiple possession with intent to distribute charges. And officials also said Carter was wanted on a federal felon in possession warrant at the time.
Authorities say the men were arrested during a series of raids around Bogalusa. They say the men are part of a snatcher gang that has been a problem around that city for several years. Investigators say the gang is responsible for drug distribution, armed robberies, and burglaries, and have been selling stolen firearms.
In Bogalusa, Louisiana, the crew locals called the Snatcher Gang didn't operate like a big city super organization, but in a town of barely over 10,000 people, their footprint felt huge. Investigators and residents described Snatcher as a tight circle of dealers pushing H laced with Fendi on Bogalusa streets, sometimes stamped and branded to build a name, and backing that trade with guns. In a community already dealing with addiction and poverty, that combination of Fendi, street-level intimidation, and sudden flare-ups of violence turned a small mill town into the backdrop for overdoses, retaliatory beefs, and armed encounters that outpaced its size. Federal agents eventually folded Snatch It into a wider Washington Parish operation that focused on drugs and firearms trafficking. ATF, Bogalusa police, and parish authorities worked together, hitting houses with warrants, recovering drugs, cash, and weapons, and tracing how guns and narcotics were moving along local highways.
Authorities say the men were arrested during
each overdose or gun case as a one-off, they started building it as an enterprise. A group of Bogalusa men allegedly supplying drugs, arming themselves despite prior records, and using the gang's name to project fear and control. That culminated in federal indictments accusing several defendants of conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, possession with intent to distribute, and firearms offenses like being a felon in possession or carrying guns in furtherance of actions involving proceeds from drug offenses, along with unauthorized use of a movable and soliciting for prosti work. In a small city, that's not just an arrest, it's a shockwave. It raises the kind of questions that don't fit neatly into a police press release. How close was the alleged operation to local power? Was the city being led while investigators were building a case in the background? And what does it do to a community when the person meant to represent order and stability becomes part of the headline? Bogalusa police say the case started the night when officers were called to Our Lady of the Angels Hospital about a shooting victim. Investigators said Larman Godbolt had been shot earlier in the 1800 block of Lasley Street in Bogalusa and was later pronounced dead at the hospital. 3 juvenile suspects, ages 15, 16, and 17, and believed armed robbery was the motive. Investigators also alleged the teens were connected to the YBF Street gang out of Illinois, with at least one having ties back to Bogalusa. Detectives tracked the suspects, arrested them, and said they seized 3 handguns during the takedown. Bogalusa's so-called Snatcher Gang appears in court records as a small local crew that federal agents said helped move drugs through Washington Parish and beyond. Investigators with ATF and Bogalusa police spent months building the case with controlled buys and surveillance. By 2019, they told a federal grand jury that 3 Bogalusa brothers, including DeMarquez, Devin Harris, were central to a local drug pipeline, selling amounts that ranged from small street-level deals to multi-ounce quantities. Agents said they repeatedly purchased drugs from Harris and his brothers Trevian and John Zarion between late 2018 and May 2019, and that their circle kept appearing as investigators traced supply. Harris drew wider attention when ATF New Orleans issued a wanted notice labeling him a suspected Snatcher Gang member and warning he should be considered armed and dangerous. A Louisiana State Police trooper stopped Harris on Interstate 20, where he allegedly used the name Sean Forbes. When the trooper requested a K-9 and Harris refused a search, police say he fled, triggering a multi-parish pursuit that reportedly reached around 125 miles per hour before he crashed on Louisiana 581. After the wreck, investigators said they recovered suspected drugs from the vehicle, consistent with what federal agents had accused him of trafficking. On the state side, the chase added multiple charges, including drug possession and aggravated flight from an officer, along with traffic-related counts. Public reporting described the arrest and bookings, but did not clearly lay out how every state charge was ultimately resolved. In March 2022, Harris pleaded guilty to multiple drug counts tied to a larger indictment, including conspiracy and distribution offenses. A federal judge sentenced him to 262 months in prison, just under 22 years.
Nearly 3 years ago, city, parish, and state law enforcement officials made headlines with the indictment and arrest of 19 alleged members and associates of the Gardera area Big Money Block Boys street gang. These arrests were part of a significant crackdown involving charges of racketeering and various other crimes, marking the largest gang-related roundup in East Baton Rouge Parish's history. It was also the first major prosecution tied to the Baton Rouge Area Violence Elimination Project, known as BRAVE. The 24-count indictment against the group included serious charges such as attempted second-degree deletion, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and a range of drug and gun offenses. In January, nearly 3 years after the original indictment and after multiple delays, prosecutors dropped the racketeering charges. The original 19 defendants have since dwindled to 8, including 7 key figures prosecutors label as major players. Several defendants have either pleaded guilty or been dismissed from the case. The remaining 8 defendants will face separate trials. Moore admitted that prosecuting a large racketeering case is challenging, especially with so many defendants involved. He added that funding issues also complicated the process. Public Defender Mike Mitchell echoed those concerns, noting that his office had real financial constraints, making it difficult to manage the large, complex case. State District Judge Trudy White had initially ordered the state to set aside $3 million to pay for court-appointed lawyers for 7 of the defendants. However, the State First Circuit Court of Appeal reversed her decision, calling the amount exorbitant. As a result, White recused herself from the case, which was later reassigned to another judge. In March, the case was stayed once again when officials from the East Baton Rouge Parish Public Defender's Office and the Louisiana Public Defender Board argued there was no funding available for court-appointed attorneys. Judge Jerome Winsberg, who was appointed to oversee the case, reduced the defendants' bail and released those not serving time for unrelated charges. The stay was lifted in November when resources became available to pay the attorneys, and the court ordered prosecutors to simplify the charges further.
They say call themselves the Motion Boys. Deputies say they found several locations used to hide and distribute all this stuff, the drugs, across the parish. Those 6 are now facing street gang charges and several drug and gun charges.
Deputies, though, are still looking for these 2 suspects in relation to that case. EBRSO says they believe Mitchell Johnson is the leader of the Motion Boys. Deputies say Chedrick Townsend is also involved.
Authorities in East Baton Rouge Parish are on the hunt for 2 suspects after a major drug bust involving a group known as the Motion Boys. According to the East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office, a 2-month investigation targeted multiple individuals associated with the group. Investigators identified several locations used by the suspects to hide and distribute drugs throughout the parish, as well as the group's leader, Mitchell Johnson, and several other co-conspirators.
Members of the Block Boys gang were found guilty today by a federal judge. Prosecutors say they terrorized the Queensboro and Ingleside neighborhood for years. They are convicted of drugs and weapon charges. 4 others indicted for the same crimes have already pled guilty.
That's right, Jackie. The U.S. Attorney and the Shreveport Police Chief Ben Raymond is warning gang members, saying they're coming for you. Now, DeMarcus Morris, the leader of the Block Boys, was sentenced this week to more than 30 years in prison for conspiracy and distribution charges. Jimmy Durden Jr. and Gary McCain were also sentenced this week for their roles in the organized crime ring. All were convicted on drug trafficking and firearm offenses. These were the last of 8 to be sentenced.
You know, the biggest gang in Shreveport is the Shreveport Police Department, and you can't compete with us, and there's no need in trying. But if you're doing violent crime, if you're committing crimes, and you're preying on our citizens, we're after you.
In July 2017, a federal grand jury indicted 9 members of the Shreveport Street gang known as the Block Boys, also called Get Money Boys or GMB. The indictment charged them with a wide-ranging racketeer-influenced and corrupt organization's RICO conspiracy, along with multiple drug trafficking and weapons violations. According to prosecutors, from 2012 onward, the Block Boys operated as a violent criminal enterprise in the Queensboro and Ingleside neighborhoods. Investigators documented 66 separate overt acts tied to the conspiracy, ranging from shootings and drive-by attacks to threats, assaults, and robberies. These acts were allegedly carried out to expand the gang's control, protect its drug territory, and intimidate rivals. The indictment further revealed that the gang trafficked in large amounts of narcotics. Members are also accused of stockpiling firearms and using them openly in the community to commit violent crimes and instill fear. Prosecutors say the Block Boys frequently fired shots into cars and residences, carried out armed robberies, and even beat a jailhouse informant in an effort to silence potential witnesses. These acts of intimidation were a key part of maintaining the gang's influence and preventing cooperation with law enforcement. All 9 defendants identified by both name and nickname were arrested and charged with RICO conspiracy, multiple counts of drug distribution, firearms offenses, and violent crimes in aid of racketeering. The potential sentences were severe, ranging from 10 to 20 years on drug charges to life imprisonment on RICO and violent crime counts, along with substantial fines. As one sheriff involved in the case bluntly stated, the Block Boys were violent people. They will delete you if you don't respect them, underscoring the gang's brutal reputation and the level of threat they posed to the Shreveport community.
G gang, also based uptown. 2 men are still on the run, however, Kentrell Hickerson and Kevin Lynch. WDSU anchor Rachel Wolf tells us more about the DA's plans and what public defenders are saying about the case.
We will use every weapon in our arsenal to bring them to justice.
Orleans Parish District Attorney Leon Canizero was firm as he described a 30-count racketeering indictment against 20 men in the 3G gang. He says the group conspired to distribute illegal drugs and used violence to gain and maintain control over the area where it operated near 3rd Street in South Galvez.
They don't show any breaks to the people of this community. We're going to give them no breaks either.
Authorities say the 3G gang is responsible for at least 10 in the last 5 years.
Magnolia Shorty, born Renetta Lowe, got her stage name from the late rapper Magnolia Slim, who was also from the Magnolia housing development. The rapper, known as the Queen of Bounce, was discovered by Brian Birdman Williams and came onto the music scene in the 1990s. The 28-year-old's most recent project included a collaboration with New Orleans high school student Courtney Hart. This song, My Boy, helped the teen land a record deal with Jive Records. Local DJ Wild Wayne says these collaborations were Magnolia Shorty's specialty. He doubts she was the intended target when she was shot. She and an unidentified male were gunned down around 12:30 Monday in the Georgetown apartment complex on Morrison Road.
The 3NG gang, short for Third and Galvez, rose to prominence in the early 2000s from the tough streets of Central City, New Orleans. Born out of poverty and crime around the former Calliope housing projects, Third and Galvez quickly became a violent and feared group, dominating drug sales and enforcing its rule through brutality. Their name, tied to their home turf, became synonymous with fear as they fought and defeated rival groups like the Calliope Porch Boys, eventually taking control of large swaths of the Hoffman Triangle. Led by figures like Kentrell Black Hickerson, 3rd and Galvez was notorious for using deadly violence to protect its open-air drug markets. The gang's activities went beyond street-level dealing. They orchestrated deletions, intimidated witnesses, and sparked deadly rivalries with other gangs, most notably the 110ers from the 10th and 11th wards. The feud between 3NG and the 110ers turned into a bloody war that devastated communities. In 2015, several members were indicted under a new umbrella known as the 39ers, a violent alliance between 3NG and the G-Strip gang from the 9th Ward. The 39ers RICO indictment included charges for deletions, drug trafficking, and witness killings. Among the most infamous crimes tied to the gang were the demise of bounce music legend Magnolia Shorty and the assassination of federal informant Michael Marshall. Trials in 2017 led to sweeping convictions. 10 defendants were found guilty. Several were sentenced to life in federal prison. State prosecutors also secured convictions against 3NG figures, including Hickerson, who was convicted on drug conspiracy charges in 2019. Other gang members received life sentences for the demise of toddler Kira Holmes. By 2020, with nearly all its leadership either dead or in prison, 3rd and Galvez had been effectively dismantled. While some violence and remnants of 3rd and Galvez influence lingered, especially in the form of younger affiliates and revenge deletions, Central City began to experience relief.
Officers are picking up the shell casing markings. The scene is starting to quiet down somewhat, but just moments ago, it was a very active scene here in the St. Roch neighborhood. Investigators are telling us they're still trying to piece together the who and the why this happened. But here's what we know so far. Sometime after about 4:30 this afternoon, 2 men were sitting in an SUV here at the corner of Elysian Fields and North Miro Street when another car pulled up alongside them and opened fire. The 2 men that were sitting in the car, one was a 30-year-old man. He was shot multiple times. He died on the way to the hospital. The other, the passenger, was 36 years old. He was shot once in the arm. He is in stable condition at University.
Police and prosecutors in the city of New Orleans announced the indictment and convictions of 2 different gangs in the city of New Orleans. We've all heard about the Ride or Die gang. Big gang, a lot of arrests in the last couple of years. Today, numerous convictions. 3 of those members were convicted, 9 others pled guilty. The U.S. Attorney and police chief say this is a step in the right direction to keeping the city of New Orleans safe. There's been an uptick in violent crime this week in the city of New Orleans with numerous shootings. But today, the mayor, the police chief, and the U.S. Attorney announced the convictions and indictments of numerous gang members. Members of the Ride or Die gang have all been convicted. Some pleaded guilty, others were convicted at trial.
In a sweeping federal indictment unsealed Friday, authorities charged 12 alleged members of a violent New Orleans gang known as Ride or Die with a host of serious offenses. At the center of the case is 21-year-old Deloyd Puggy Jones, named by prosecutors as the leader of the organization. He, along with Byron Big Baby Jones, 23, and Sidney Duda-Man Patterson, 22, are accused of being the gang's principal enforcers and drug distributors. According to federal prosecutors, the Ride or Die gang operated as a violent criminal enterprise, using firearms and intimidation to control territory and eliminate rivals. Among the most chilling accusations are several deletions linked directly to the gang's activities. Deloyd Jones is charged in connection with the demise of Rodney Coleman in November 2010 and Devin Hutton in January 2011. He and Sidney Patterson were also charged with the demise of Corey Blue that same month. Meanwhile, both Byron Jones and Sidney Patterson faced charges for the February 2013 demise of Travis Arnold. If convicted, Deloyd Jones, Byron Jones, and Sidney Patterson each face mandatory life sentences. The other 9 defendants face up to 20 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release, and could be fined up to $250,000. If convicted, Deloy Jones, Byron Jones, and Sidney Patterson each face mandatory life sentences. The other 9 defendants face up to 20 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release, and could be fined up to $250,000. Following the federal indictment of the Ride or Die gang in New Orleans, all 12 defendants were convicted and sentenced for their roles in the gang's violent and drug-related operations between 2007 and 2013. Deloy Puggy Jones, Byron Big Baby Jones, and Sidney Duda Man Patterson were each found guilty on multiple charges, including racketeering, drug trafficking, and deletion. The remaining 9 defendants were sentenced to terms ranging from 48 to 121 months.
May 29, 2012, a spray of gunfire on Simon Boulevard left Shawana Pierce and Briana Allen dead, and this community forever changed. Almost 3 years later, a jury returned guilty verdicts for prosecutors say Damon Sandifer, Sam Newman, and Tyron Harden were gang members uptown who opened fire on street rivals but left 2 dead in the crossfire. Briana was at a birthday party, a celebration of life, when she lost her own. And Shawana, who family members called Nani, was on her way to return a rental car when she was struck by a stray bullet.
In May 2013, the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office announced a sweeping 51-count state racketeering indictment against 15 alleged members of the 110ers, a violent street gang operating across New Orleans' Central City. The 110ers functioned as an umbrella group formed by merging crews from the 10th and 11th wards. Their reign of violence between 2010 and 2013 included drug trafficking, armed robberies, witness intimidation, and at least 10 deletions, including the high-profile May 2012 drive-by shooting when 5-year-old Briana Allen and 33-year-old Shawana Pierce met their demise during a child's birthday party. That horrific crime galvanized the city and led to intensified law enforcement pressure on street gangs. Investigators tied the gang to a broader pattern of turf wars, drive-bis, and a code of silence. Key figures in the indictment included Rico Newman, Lil Rico, believed to be the gang's organizer, Demond Lil D. Sandifer, a feared triggerman, Antonio Big Rico Johnson, Sam Newman, Lil Sam, and shooters Stanton, Nan Na Guillory, and Tyron D. Man Harden, who were implicated in the Briana Allen shooting. One female defendant, John Sticks Jones, surrendered herself with legal representation the day after the indictment was unsealed, highlighting how even female associates were charged for their roles in aiding the gang's operations. As the case progressed, several defendants took plea deals, while others, including Sandifer, Sam Newman, and Harden, went to trial in late 2014. In January 2015, all 3 were convicted on racketeering and multiple counts. They received life without parole, plus decades of additional time for gang-related sentencing enhancements. Guillory was tried separately and also received life for his role in the child's demise. Others like Rico Newman and Joshua Pittman pleaded guilty to lesser charges such as manslaughter or conspiracy and received sentences between 15 and 25 years. By 2016, most of the defendants had either been convicted at trial or resolved their cases through plea agreements. Notably, Joseph Du-Man Bienemy, who was already serving life for an unrelated deletion, had his racketeering charge dropped in exchange for waiving future appeals, an example of how the DA strategically managed case outcomes.
Due to the threat of the coronavirus, Glenn McCormick was released from Orleans Parish Jail Thursday. He had been awaiting trial as one of the ringleaders of the notorious drug gang known as D-Block. Here's the ankle monitor McCormick was wearing Sunday when he was cut down by a hail of bullets. Matt Dennis's company, A2I, put on the bracelet.
He was set to be free and to do as he pleased. And what he chose to do was frequent the area he is known to frequent in his entire criminal history.
Electronic monitoring data obtained exclusively by Channel 4 shows that upon his release, the 33-year-old McCormick did not go to his home on the West Bank.
And he goes immediately back to his old drug stomping grounds where he is accused of all of these drug crimes.
With most people following stay-at-home orders, records show McCormick visited the Dumaine Street drug hotspot every day since his release.
And he frequents that place the entire time he's out.
When McCormick was first indicted in 2018, his bail was set at $1 million. Judge Darrell Durbany dropped that to $150,000 more than a year ago, then down to a free signature bond with a curfew last week.
So when he released him with no restrictions other than the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. curfew, basically signed his death warrant.
Well, Scott, the gang is called the 6th Ward D Block, and District Attorney Leon Canizero says the 11 men who make up the gang have terrorized an area of the 6th Ward near Dumaine and Broad Street for years. Right now, 10 men are in custody. All are charged with racketeering. The men, as you see here, are Lance Prince, Sheldon Jackson, Mark Quinn Lewis, Blake Ricks, Nathaniel Brown, Torin Duhon, Jamal Howard, Terrell Muse, Cecil Martin, and Glenn McCormick. On the run is 20-year-old Darnell Ellis. Leon Canizero says the men operated in the 2600 block of Dumaine Street. Canizero says this is the first time in more than 10 years that a local prosecutor has used the racketeering statute against the gang, meaning that they can bring up all of these charges, all of these crimes that they're charged with doing in court.
In May 2018, a Louisiana state grand jury indicted 9 members of the so-called D-Block gang following a year-long undercover investigation into a drug trafficking operation centered around the 2500 to 2600 block of Dumaine Street in Mid-City, New Orleans. The indictment, announced by then District Attorney Leon Canizero and the NOPD, marked the culmination of Operation Wipeout, which aimed to shut down the gang's open-air drug market. By May 2018, authorities had identified at least 9 suspects involved in a multi-drug trafficking conspiracy, using several stash houses and vehicles to sell. Some members even appeared in music videos bragging about their criminal activity. The indicted members ranged in age from their early 20s to 30s and included Dwayne Jenkins, Gabriel Bell, and Brian Lott, identified as primary dealers already incarcerated on unrelated charges at the time the indictment was unsealed. Other notable figures were Taryn Blackman, Glenn Spot McCormick, Derek Youngboy Brumfield, and Lawrence Lowe Conway, all arrested during coordinated raids. The gang primarily operated in the Treme, Mid-City corridor, and authorities were cleared to distinguish this D-Block from a separate Algiers-based group of the same name that had been dismantled years earlier. The majority of the defendants ultimately entered guilty pleas. By late 2018, 11 D-Block members had pleaded guilty to racketeering or related drug offenses. Blackman, McCormick, Brumfield, and Conway were sentenced to terms ranging from 10 to 15 years. Jenkins and others who were already incarcerated had additional years added to their sentences. Notably, Glenn Spot McCormick, believed to be one of the gang's top leaders, was released after serving his sentence, but was fatally shot not long after his release, in what law enforcement sources believe was a targeted retaliation tied to lingering gang rivalries. His death underscored the ongoing danger and violence associated with the crew, even after the case had officially closed.
Well, this morning,
Still very much an active scene. Take a look behind me, and we should point out this home that's being raided right now is the exact home where little 5-year-old Briana Allen was shot and killed as part of a drive-by 1 year ago. Since about 4 o'clock today, about 40 members of the New Orleans Police Department, state police, and federal law enforcement officials who make up the MAG, or Multi-Agency Gang Task Force, have been out here. Check out this video. They had the helicopter in the air and they had officers on the ground. Numerous people, about a half dozen that we can count, were taken into custody and driven off. Details are still coming in, but a city official does confirm to me that this roundup deals with an earlier indictment from today, a federal indictment involving members of the Allen family for alleged drug dealing at or around this location. We caught up with some of the people who live in this house or who know members of this family. They were not very pleased that this raid was going on. Here's what they told us.
It's just a family member told me that they went and got my baby off his job, and he don't really be into nothing. He did wrong, it's true, and he pays society for it. He go to work faithfully. He don't be out here doing nothing. Now all of a sudden he doing right, got a job, obey his parole officers and stuff, and then they go on his job and just take him off his job like that. And we just lost my grandmother yesterday.
We should point out Simon Bolivar closed all the way from Calliope, the Pontchartrain Expressway, to Martin Luther King. You can see behind me still a lot of cops out here, and over here a lot of people in the neighborhood have gathered to watch what's going on. You heard reaction from some of them, but pretty big scene out here in the Central City neighborhood right now as police from this MAG, or Multi-Agency Gang Unit, are still on the scene going through the house. Once again, still very fluid, but we do know that they arrested probably a half dozen people, and it does stem from an earlier federal indictment from today involving drugs in this area. We'll have much more coming up at 10 o'clock. Called the YMM Gang, numerous members of that gang were indicted today in federal court. The U.S. Attorney tells us this sends an example to people in New Orleans.
If you are charged with a federal gun violation, that means that you are going to be in prison from the time that you are arrested. That means that if you are convicted, and we oftentimes get convictions, you are going to be serving that time not anywhere close to Louisiana, but in some far-flung regions of this country.
The young Melph Mafia, a violent street gang operating in New Orleans' Central City neighborhood, was dismantled through one of the city's most significant federal RICO prosecutions. The gang, based around the former Melpomene housing projects, was heavily involved in drug trafficking, shootings, and a deadly rivalry with the 110ers gang. In August 2014, federal authorities issued an initial indictment charging 11 members with drug and firearms offenses. A year later, in August 2015, a superseding indictment expanded the case to 31 counts, adding federal racketeering charges and 5 murders. Among the most notable deletions were the deaths of Vinnie Smith and Deshaun Hartford, allegedly 110ers affiliates, and the brazen highway shooting of innocent bystander Travis Thomas. The case went to trial in June 2017, resulting in convictions for 5 members. Lionel "Lot" Allen, considered the gang's leader and a second-generation gang member, was sentenced to life plus 35 years for RICO, firearm conspiracy, and 3 deletions. Jawan Titty Forsha and Dedrick Roy Keelan also received life sentences for their roles in multiple killings. 2 others, Brian Scott and Delwyn Pooh McLaren, received 20 and 16 years, respectively, for drug and firearms conspiracy charges. All appeals were denied in 2020, solidifying the sentences. Several members pleaded guilty before trial. Jacoby Coboyd received a 40-year sentence, while Alfred Al Cobbins and Sean Gunnar Grayson received 21 and 22.5 years, respectively. In a sweeping state racketeering case announced by Orleans Parish District Attorney Liam Conitsaro, 9 members of a high-volume drug trafficking organization known as the Cross the Canal Gang were indicted. The group, based in New Orleans' 9th Ward, is accused of operating a large-scale narcotics ring, with several of the alleged members connected by blood or long-standing criminal relationships. Among them is Corey Da Chef Expose, 32, who authorities identify as a leader of the operation. Expose has an extensive criminal history, including a 2000 conviction for possession with intent to distribute, for which he served 5 years. In 2005, he was sentenced to 30 months as a repeat offender after pleading guilty to cocaine possession. More recently, he was convicted in March of attempted possession of eight and is now awaiting sentencing under Louisiana's habitual offender statute, which could result in a much harsher penalty. Another central figure in the indictment is Bruce "Bald Head" Carter, 32, who has a documented criminal relationship with Corey Expose dating back over 14 years. Carter was convicted in 2004 of aggravated second-degree battery and sentenced to 7 years in prison. At the time of this indictment, he faced multiple pending charges, including possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, possession with intent to distribute heroin, possession of more than 28 grams of white girl, and illegal carrying of a weapon. The charges focus heavily on narcotics offenses, many involving substantial quantities of illegal drugs. The Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office announced racketeering indictments against 2 alleged street gangs, one known as the CTC Snake Gang, based in the Lower Ninth Ward. Prosecutors, working in partnership with New Orleans police and federal ATF agents, said both groups were involved in large-scale drug trafficking and violent criminal activity throughout the city. The CTC Snake Gang, named after the local nickname Cutthroat City for the Lower Ninth Ward, is accused of dealing while using violence and intimidation to maintain control over their territory, specifically around Flood and Mary Streets. Many of the group's alleged crimes involve large quantities of narcotics, and several members are believed to be related. 10 of the 19 defendants named in the indictment are currently in custody. At the center of the case is Corey "Da Chef" Expose, 33, who prosecutors say led the CTC Snake Gang. Expose has a lengthy criminal history, including a 2000 conviction for possession with intent to distribute and a 2005 conviction for possession. In March, he was convicted on a separate charge of attempted possession from a 2009 arrest. Facing life imprisonment under the state's habitual offender law, Expose agreed to a flat 20-year sentence. However, he remains a defendant in the ongoing racketeering case. Bruce Carter has a prior conviction for aggravated second-degree battery in 2004, for which he served 7 years. Court records indicate a long-standing drug-related relationship between Carter and Corey Expose dating back over a decade. Several defendants were initially arrested in separate drug busts in early and mid-2012. So far, only one of the 9 indicted defendants has entered a guilty plea. Bilo Denley pleaded guilty shortly after the indictment and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The remaining defendants are still awaiting trial. In West Carroll Parish, Pioneer, Louisiana, deputies said a summer-long investigation into Kevin Leonard Thompson, Lil Man, ended when officers raided a home at 139 First Street and detained Thompson along with Leonard Bass. Investigators reported seizing 40.3 grams of meth, 10.8 grams of powder Coca-Cola, 9.2 grams, 6.6 ounces of Mary, 3,431 cash, 4 handguns, and a K-47 rifle, digital scales, and 2 vehicles. Narcotics agents with the Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Office said they executed a search warrant at the home of and seized a large 1,009 of narcotics and weapons. Investigators said they recovered roughly 1 pound of H-containing Fendi, 1 pound of meth, 2 pounds of Coca-Cola, 5 pounds of Mary, plus MDMA, promethazine, and other drugs, along with about $253,705 in cash and multiple firearms with serial numbers removed. Martin wasn't present during the search, so deputies issued a warrant and asked for the public's help locating him. A few days later, deputies said they located Martin's vehicle and attempted a stop, leading to a short pursuit that ended when the vehicle crashed and Martin was taken into custody. Baton Rouge police said a joint investigation into a Baton Rouge-based group culminated in multiple search warrants being served at homes in the 2,600 and 2,800 blocks of 68th Street. According to BRPD, the searches produced a mix of narcotics, prescription pills, and a weapon, 4.9 grams of drugs, 137.6 grams of Mary, 40 dosage units of tramadol, 40 dosage units of MDMA, 2 dosage units of Valium, 9.5 dosage units of Adderall, 72.5 dosage units of alprazolam, 4 16-ounces bottles of promethazine, and a Glock Model 19. Operation Kutt Off was an organized crime drug enforcement task force case in the Western District of Louisiana that federal prosecutors said targeted a meth trafficking network operating mainly in Wynn Parish and Jackson Parish. Investigators allege D. Lewis Johnson IV, based in California, sourced bulk meth from Mexican suppliers and shipped it to Jones and Harris. Harris then distributed it onward to others including Justin Randall Goss and Curavius O'Marion D. Harrell. DOJ also describes a separate shipping episode in December 2019 where agents intercepted calls about mailing 1 pound of meth via overnight shipment. In Natchitoches, Louisiana, agents with the Natchitoches Multi-Jurisdictional Drug Task Force said a long-term narcotics investigation that began in February 2019 led them to believe 2 local men were distributing illegal drugs in the area. On March 28, 2019, agents executed simultaneous search warrants at 2 residences, one in the 100 block of Reba Street and another in the 400 block of AMC Dobson Way, and reported seizing 904 suspected X tablets and 130 suspected alprazolam pills, along with packaging materials commonly associated with drug distribution. Louisiana, agents with the Natchitoches Multi-Jurisdictional Drug Task Force said a long-term narcotics investigation that began in February 2019 led them to believe 2 local men were distributing illegal drugs in the area. On March 28, 2019, agents executed simultaneous search warrants at 2 residences, one in the 100 block of Reba Street and another in the 400 block of AMC Dobson Way, and reported seizing 904 suspected X tablets and 130 suspected alprazolam pills, along with packaging materials commonly associated with drug distribution network. When you line these cases up, the pattern is clear. The biggest busts rarely come from luck, they come from investigators connecting dots over time, then moving fast with warrants across multiple parishes and agencies. Some stories end at the arrest stage, where outcomes can still change in court. Others move into federal court, where conspiracy charges and drug weights can lead to long sentences. But the through line stays the same. Whether it's a Port Allen traffic stop with 7 figures in cash, a Slidell Fendi operation, a Concordia Parish wiretap case, or a Baton Rouge sweep tied to local crews, Louisiana's drug enforcement story is a constant tug-of-war between networks trying to stay hidden and task forces trying to shut the pipeline down.